My name is Christopher Peter and welcome to the CRC Review Podcast. The CRC Review experience includes both this podcast and the Perspective site, both of which are your source for common sense commentary covering the public policy and salient topics impacting our national economy and overall society. The original content you will experience focuses on available facts, evidence, and data. In this podcast, I focus on our democracy and how to preserve American democracy. All in the backdrop of the meeting with our G7 allies and the meeting between two former Cold War foes. My aim is to make the case that America needs decisive leadership domestic and abroad to preserve democracy and our way of life. America should not limit our choices to the buddy system that rarely bears fruit. Also, I look at some institutions pushing our system of government from a democracy towards an autocracy. Let us get started. The world saw Joe Biden firsthand as the American president while Biden took part in the G7 summit. Afterwards, Biden met with the leader of our former Cold War foe, Russian President Vladimir Putin. In fairness, Russia is not the USSR, which was our true Cold War foe. But there is clear reason to believe that it seeks to restore the level of influence the former Soviet Union had without needing the banner of the Soviet Union. Russia is not our only global foe with the ability to offset our global influence. The greatest threat to our standing on the world stage is China, which has both the diplomatic and economic influence to directly counter our interests. The question Americans need a substantive answer on is whether we have the leader who can demonstrate strength in the face of adversity. Not through carefully scripted words that do little beyond posturing, but willing to take decisive actions that will hold our prospective enemies accountable for their actions. Americans see a complete contrast in style of foreign policy. Under former President Donald Trump, there was a clear path forward. Our government exuded strength both with words and decisive actions. Interestingly, the Trump foreign policy also held our allies accountable for their promises and commitments. Sometimes our friends do not live up to expectations as well. Certainly, in the case of NATO, where European nations reaped benefits, they did not pay for. The foreign policy approach under Biden seems to be shaped around the same ineffective principles used during the Obama administration, with a less effective pitchman for this direction. Biden is once again relying on a buddy system of foreign policy, hoping back-channel gossip and silent treatment may influence behavior. Can we trust that our potential diplomatic or economic foes care enough to be included in talks when they see a path towards greater influence outside of the Western blueprint? Can we trust that our allies, who rely more on these same foes than us regarding critical economic trade, will be able to stand up for our interest when they have little stake in the game? Europe relies more on Russia for energy and China for manufacturing than America can offset. Does Russia or China care what Europeans when they are militarily superior to Europe and, in terms of China, stronger economically? At least, President Trump understood and demonstrated the willingness to unilaterally stand up to our biggest foes, effectively using tariffs and trade actions to keep them in check. The biggest obstacle to China is America. A strong, robust, and innovative free market American economy can counter the Chinese economy. A more centralized economy would allow Chinese leaders a more predictable foe to counter. Trump also did what he could to drive energy trade to America from Russia, which Biden helped to reverse back towards Russia. As American Democrats sought to paint a picture of strong relationship between Trump and Putin, as well as initiating the first big lie with the debunked election collusion hoax, the real source of increased power has been both Obama, who looked the other way on Crimea, and now Biden, who strengthened the energy control and now handed Putin a blueprint to bottleneck our economy and what Biden will respond to. There should be doubted Biden will respond to anything, but he believes his list of 16 areas will amount to a deterrent. Sanctions will do little since America does not really engage in any significant trade with Russia, even less with energy shifting away. If America wants our buddy system to effectively hold our foes in check, our leaders will need to do more to make us a preferable trade partners and ensure all honor their commitments and responsibility. As many Americans view our NATO alliance as sacred, which it is, our allies need to demonstrate they do still support the collective commitment and understand their responsibilities with this association. Biden is right in viewing our NATO allies as valuable assets, but if our friends do not live up to the financial commitments, then can America trust them to live up to other commitments, many of which are more challenging? While our allies are valuable assets, America needs to be leading from the front of the table, not behind. Europe has shown a great inability to lead global efforts. Europe does not appear to have the temperament needed to hold violators accountable in a manner that forces changes in behaviors without the use of bribes. The world needs America to take the bull by the horn and set the direction. America needs to be able to set the tone in our handling of our chief foes. The facade of the Geneva meeting did not really provide a sense that Biden is up to the challenge. Words without defined actions and next steps are relatively useless. At least Obama was able to secure hollow agreements that never panned out. From what was reported, there were some quiet threats on specific industries and specific retaliation measures, which is not ideal. Our enemies should not be handed a list of targets and a list of areas they need to secure against retaliation. Keeping them guessing is not just a fancy slogan but a good staple of foreign policy posturing. America must understand the real risks posed by our global foes. American politicians downplay the influence of Russia when the messaging plays to their base and exaggerate the impact when it distracts from political failure. Again, Democrats mocked Republicans when Republicans put forth that Russia is still a threat and then created the original big lie blaming Russia for their election lose. They obviously interfered, but not in a meaningful manner. One could argue in the same spirit America does. Nonetheless, we do not want foreign interference or influence of any kind, including campaign money or fake dossiers. There was not even mention of any meaningful agreement to not meddle in each other's politics. Russia is a potential threat to us. But so is China. Can America really trust that Biden can stand up to China in a meaningful manner and secure concessions? Biden does not seem like he is even willing to put any unilateral pressure on our enemies. Are we supposed to trust that our allies will have the backbone to go to the lengths needed to counter China and Russia? Especially when it is America that bears the economic and diplomatic consequences. We should not outsource our interest. Especially to entities that also target our firms. But they are our friends. Who needs enemies when you have friends that do the same? Joe Biden made an interesting remark framing his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin as democracy versus autocracy. The promoted platform of the American Democratic Party and the attitude of our current administration, one has valid reasons to question whether the meeting contained a single supporter of democracy. Only an experienced autocrat and a novice one. Democracy is an institution in our society, but a concept some Americans do not fully understand or appreciate. America does not operate as a pure democracy. In the same way America has a free market economy, but our markets are not completely free of government intervention. Americans live under a representative democracy, also known as Democratic Republic or Republican democracy. A system of government where the people are the source of power for a government made of elected representatives of the people. Our founding documents call for a nation for the people, by the people, and of the people. A reason why elected officials are traditionally called public servants. They are elected to serve the people, the holders of societal power. The great aspect of our democracy is the fact that Americans do not have to agree with or comply with government edicts that we do not agree with. Besides elections, Americans have the constitutional right to push back against government actions or even adjudicate our disagreements in our courts, which make up our government. This can be a challenge to leaders who fail to remember that they work for the people, not the other way around. Many politicians love to decry how fragile democracy is in America, ironically foreshadowing their intent to weaken it even further. Government overreach, as seen throughout the pandemic, is not a positive sign for our democracy. Rather a clear warning that autocracy and oppression is taking root in some political circles in America. Our Constitution provides some level of protections, which require some politicians and their party to rely on indirect sources or strongly associated institutions to help exert control. There are strong forces in media and tech coercing the public to accept certain narratives and beliefs, even if these counter facts and reason. Financial dependency to our government programs also allows for oppression, as our social programs rarely elevate people out of poverty. Economic freedom is a key to protecting our democracy, as control over one's purse is a source of coercive power. Nationalizing industries and personal choice will further harm our democracy. Rather, allowing Americans to retain choice, freedom, and self-determination for the economic and personal outcomes will ensure the people retain their power and rights. Crowding out dissent and alternative voices will not protect our democracy. Our American democracy is great and worth protecting because it empowers the people to usher in American greatness through our innovation, ambition, hard work, and productivity, all of which are being socially diminished by some on the left who believe these are a myth. Some people who associate with the progressive left do not want Americans to believe in the American dream, nor do they want Americans to believe they have the power to push boundaries of human achievement. Rather, they want us to believe it is the government that enables all this because of a few paved roads, many of which are poorly maintained. Because of a quickly diminishing education system that fails many of its students. Our American democracy is at stake when our political leaders foster false sentiments creating fear aimed to increase the public's reliance on them rather than empowering the people to realize their great potential. There is a role for our government in society. Not in our daily life or economic pursuits. Our American democracy is only safe when Americans realize it is not the role of government to determine our limits and potential, but the capacity of each individual American's effort, ingenuity, and determination. The actions, attitudes, and behaviors of our political leaders do have an impact on our democracy. To a large degree, Americans are individualistic in nature, which is a good thing. But there is a great amount of groupthink and coalescing around political candidates during national elections. People on the right of center tend to automatically support nominees of the GOP. People on the left of center tend to prefer Democrat offerings. There are not many true independents in our electorate, as voter histories tend to lean one party or the other. Some people support candidates because they feel society, or their personal ecosystem of connections, expect them to. If you live in a blue state within a network of family and friends that more often than not vote Democrat, there is great pressure to hold the line if you are one that desires to go along to get along. Side note, if a person is a friend or family member worth being in your life, that person should value you for who you are regardless of differences, given all can respectfully agree to disagree at times. Back to the subject at hand, people should vote for a candidate based on the alignment of policies to their specific needs and the needs of their dependents and household. Not based on compliance to a community expectation that may counter the individual needs. In the age of social media, people's personal and political views and opinions are not as easily kept personal as in the past. Although voting records are somewhat private, people question the comments others like or ads they support. People are more open to share views of political movements or causes on social media than they might otherwise in other forms of communication. Depending on how one interacts with social media outlets, social media services might not always be the best platforms for political debates, given the number of hysteria-fueled users and how social media companies facilitate conversations. Social media platforms are not the best arenas to get a real feel for the overall opinion of a society. Why? Because the technology companies operating the platforms greatly impact the content users experience and can shape dialogues in misleading ways. Consider the dialogues about the origins of the COVID-19 coronavirus. Social media platforms halted any content that either supported or advanced the position that the pandemic may have originated from a lab leak in Wuhan region of China. Rather, users could claim the outbreak was due to people eating bats, but not the more reasonable and less offensive accusation. Should we really believe that people eating bats caused the global pandemic or the food chain was the issue? The more likely event may be the one our leaders are now given greater credibility to. But tech companies did their part to decide which narrative was right, apparently driven by political purposes. Social media companies and other technology companies are not only a threat to our privacy rights, financial security, and mental well-being, but are very harmful to our democracy, free speech rights, and political system. Both Republicans and Democrats agree that technology companies need to be regulated because of their impact on our politics, but for different reasons. Democrats want tech and social media companies to do more to advance their political agendas, monitoring speech they deem offensive and dangerous. Obviously, we all can agree that direct threats, racism, and dishonesty is not acceptable. But the standard used in monitoring is broad, vague, and clearly used for political purposes. Many progressive left-wing Democrats want tech companies to use ambiguity to help silence their political opponents. On the other hand, Republicans seek regulations to prevent social media and tech companies from suppressing speech that does not meet any reasonable standard. There is a great deal of evidence and data showing that political leanings at these firms dictate who gets to speak and what the audience gets to experience. The excuse that these firms are private enterprises is not one that is acceptable in modern-day America. Consider how social media companies purposefully influence how the public perceives political candidates with the inconsistent use of labels and bans. There is a clear lack of consistent standards and an appearance of purposeful intent to influence our democracy. Firms should not be able to hide behind the private enterprise banner when they directly impact our democracy and purposefully use that influence in irresponsible manners. While I tend to be hesitant to call for new regulations, there are clear needs to act here. There needs to be avenues to ensure these firms are not silencing the public, especially when their purpose of existence is to increase access to discussions and exchanges. There needs to be standards on privacy afforded to users and avenues to make harmed users whole. We all enjoy using tech products to some degree. A podcast I recently listened to made great points about how democracy is not as easy to establish as many of us think. Especially like the version we enjoy here in America. Democracy requires more than people wanting freedom and input in how they are governed. There needs to be rules and processes for free elections and transfer of power. Ideally, checks and balances to ensure protections against corruption. But is a democracy a true democracy when a government greatly influences how you exercise your voice through limiting the choice set or controlling every aspect of everyday life that there really is no free choice? Ideally, a democracy will be combined with a free market capitalist economy, where society empowers the people by affording them freedom associated with being able to enjoy financial independence from government to some degree. The power that controls the purse strings controls the person. In order for the two institutions of government and economy respectively, a society needs to hold a level of personal responsibility to ensure that the self-determination, self-reliance, and opportunity retains the power in the public, not in government. If a person is used to living in a government-provided house, driving a government-provided car, and living off a government-provided allowance, it may be hard to transition that society to a democracy. Eventually, the society might find the path of less resistance to be another oppressive regime that will use the control to insulate them from truly free elections. A major step in weakening a democracy is outsourcing responsibility for outcomes external to the benefactors. That transfers power back to government. Exchanging self-reliance for the false comforts of government is not a desirable path forward, despite what the socialist wing of the Democratic Party attempts to sell to the public. The idea that a government-centric society and economy is desirable is not based on actual fact, but exaggeration of superficial observation. There are many voices attempting to separate people from the responsibility of their choices or behaviors, which ultimately shifts this responsibility to others in our society. The cost related to able-bodied citizens sitting on the sidelines of a recovering economy is borne not by government itself but by the taxpayers funding the government. To ensure our American democracy and the health of our economy endures, our society needs to empower the people by assigning responsibility for outcomes to the people. Americans must embrace the responsibility to plot our path forward with as much ambition, innovation, ingenuity, and productivity we are blessed with. Americans must never outsource our outcomes to sources interested in expanding its power regardless of our outcomes. There is a role for the government in our society in protecting the welfare of Americans. There is no denying that. But Americans must not believe that cradle-to-grave politics are good for free societies. The great aspect of American society is the rugged self-determination spirit that Americans hold dear. We do not like to be told what to do. Ask us fine, but do not dictate to us. That is how we maintain our democracy. The liberal concern for democracy is fleeting and disingenuous. They want a democracy that will lead to autocracy. Want government edicts to supersede personal choice. Not healthy for a democracy they claim is in constant threat. There are some institutions people want to be associated with in our society. Associations with these institutions provide individuals with clout to some degree. For instance, society places certain attributes to people who hold advanced degrees, work in military, law enforcement, healthcare, and education. Same with people who associate with religion. These individuals are usually viewed in a different light than atheists or agnostic people. The aforementioned institutions are job-specific. If we really want to be honest about our institutions, many of the good and bad attributes generally assigned to people involved in these areas could be completely underserved or loose associations. Not all teachers provide quality instruction, which is evident in the poor performance of some school districts. Some people in these fields fail to live up to the expectations and reputation of these institutions. Some may not harm the field, but simply meet the minimum qualification for association with the institution. There are far more people that claim to be Catholic and American than you will find in the pews during weekly Mass, considering non-pandemic conditions. Many of these people were baptized and meet the requirements for being Catholic but may no longer take up their cross daily. Some reserve that for show on Christmas and Easter, taking up space for those of us attending weekly. This is fine. Religion is personal. Some people have reasons they do not attend but may live up to the standards of compassion, empathy, and service to others. Others may just want the mental associations in the minds of others or social groups. Especially politicians who want to be able to appeal to the faith communities without actually having a true connection. Faith is different than working in a field and doing the minimum to keep the paycheck coming. People can understand a person being teacher simply for the summers off. But to claim association with something as personal as faith for personal political gain can be troubling. Also, claiming association for personal political gain and enacting policies that directly harm faith in America or attempt to coerce faithful individuals to break their religious views. The recent actions by American Catholic bishops to make it easier for parishes to deny communion for politicians that violate their faith is the right step. As Catholics, as well as any other religious people, we are expected to live our faith to the best of our ability each day. Faith is not just a social attribute but a guide for how we live our lives each and every day. Some of the impacted politicians feel like the move politicizes the Eucharistic. I understand their sentiment, but if you claim faith you need to live up to the expectations you agreed to. Aside from faith, many politicians make a mockery of many institutions for their personal political gain, which is why voters need to set aside narratives in our elections and see they really are voting for. See how well the candidates live up to the espoused values their message at campaign events or project on the public. The Catholic Church and the American public for that matter should not stand aside and allow the mockery to continue. There are many political characteristics politicians can hold weak affiliations with. Faith is not one of them. If one is going to combine politics and faith, maybe focusing on protecting the rights of the faithful and protecting freedom, opportunity, morality, and human rights. I thank you for taking the time to experience this episode of the CRC Review. Please continue to visit www.crcreview.com for more content.